This is just a down payment for what you did.
Midnight. The stench of motor oil and rust filled my nostrils as I lay beneath my ancient Ford pickup, wrestling with a stubborn brake line that had been leaking for weeks. The concrete floor of my garage was cold against my back, and the single work light cast harsh shadows across the tools scattered around me. This was my sanctuary, the one place where things made sense, where problems had solutions, and where nobody could touch me. My phone buzzed against my chest pocket. I ignored it. Sarah knew better than to bother me when I was working on the truck. The phone buzzed again, then again. Jesus Christ, I muttered, sliding out from under the Ford and wiping my greasy hands on an old rag. The screen showed 3 text messages from an unknown number. My stomach dropped as I read them. He's gone. Meet me at the Seacoast Motel. I need you now. Room 237. I'm waiting. Don't make me wait long, baby. The messages were clearly meant for someone else, but the area code was local. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Wrong numbers happened all the time, but something about these messages felt different, urgent, intimate. I grabbed my jacket and keys. The Seacoast Motel was a 15-minute drive through the dead streets of our dying industrial town. Boarded up storefronts lined Main Street like broken teeth, and the few businesses still operating. A pawn shop, a liquor store, a check cashing place cast sickly neon light onto cracked sidewalks. The motel sat on the edge of town like a diseased afterthought. Its pink stucco walls were stained with decades of neglect, and half the letters in the vacancy sign had burned out years ago. I pulled into the parking lot and immediately spotted 2 cars that made me go cold inside. Sarah's silver Honda Civic sat in front of room 237. Next to it, a midnight blue BMW that I recognized immediately. It belonged to Richard Blackwood, the senior partner at the law firm where my wife worked as a paralegal. I sat in my truck for 10 minutes, engine running, trying to process what I was seeing. Sarah had told me she was working late on a big case. She'd been working late a lot recently, coming home exhausted and irritable, claiming Blackwood was a demanding boss who expected perfection. Now I understood what kind of perfection he expected. I pulled out my phone and took several photos of both cars, making sure to capture the license plates and room number. Then I walked to the motel office, where a bored-looking clerk was watching late-night television behind bulletproof glass. "Excuse me," I said, sliding a $20 bill through the payment slot. "I'm supposed to meet someone in room 237, but I forgot which name the reservation is under." The clerk glanced at the money, then at his computer screen. "Blackwood. Richard Blackwood. Thanks." I pocketed the change and walked back to my truck. My hands were shaking, not with sadness, but with a cold, calculating anger that I'd never felt before. I drove to the nearest 24-hour convenience store and bought a cheap disposable camera and a pack of thumbtacks. Then I returned to the motel and did something that would have shocked the old me, the trusting me, the me who believed in marriage vows and second chances. I slashed Richard Blackwood's rear tire with my box cutter. Not enough to cause an accident, just enough to inconvenience him. Then I wrote a note on the back of a gas station receipt. "Nice to see you working so late. Hope the overtime is worth it. A concerned husband." I tucked the note under his windshield wiper and drove home. Sarah's car wasn't in our driveway when I arrived. Our house was a modest 2-story colonial that we'd bought 12 years ago, back when we still talked about having kids and growing old together. The mortgage was almost paid off, one of the few things in my life that was going according to plan. I sat at the kitchen table and waited. The house felt different now, contaminated by knowledge I couldn't unknow. Every photo on the walls, every shared memory, every "I love you" whispered in the dark. All of it was poisoned. Sarah came home at 2:47 a.m. I heard her car in the driveway, heard her fumbling with her keys at the front door. She tried to slip upstairs quietly, but I was waiting in the living room with the lights off. "How was work?" I asked. She jumped, dropping her purse. "God, you scared me. What are you doing sitting in the dark?" "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd wait up for you." I turned on the table lamp. Sarah looked disheveled. Her hair was messed up. Her lipstick was gone, and her blouse was wrinkled. "You look tired." "It was a long night. Richard had me working on depositions until almost midnight." She wouldn't meet my eyes. "I'm going to bed." "Sarah." She stopped at the bottom of the stairs. You might want to be more careful about your phone. Wrong numbers can be embarrassing. Her face went pale. What do you mean? I held up my phone, showing her the text messages. Someone's been trying to reach you. Urgent business, it looks like. She stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Then something changed in her expression. The guilt disappeared, replaced by defiance. I want a divorce, she said. The words hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my voice steady. Just like that? Just like that. And I want the house. She crossed her arms. You can move into that garage apartment above your brother's shop. It's more your speed anyway. What about counseling? What about trying to work things out? Sarah laughed, a bitter, ugly sound I'd never heard from her before. Work what out, Tom? You're a small-town mechanic who never finished college. Richard is a partner at the most prestigious law firm in the state. He can give me things you never could. Like what? Midnight meetings at Fleabag motels? Her face flushed red. Like respect. Like ambition. Like a future that doesn't involve living paycheck to paycheck in this dying town. So you've been planning this for a while. Longer than you know. She started up the stairs, then turned back. You can't afford a lawyer to fight me, Tom. I'll get everything. The house, the savings, your precious truck. Richard's already drawn up the papers. I smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. You're right about one thing, Sarah. I can't afford a lawyer. The next morning, I called my brother Danny. We hadn't spoken in 6 months. Not since our father's funeral, where we'd gotten into a screaming match about inheritance and old grudges. But family was still family, and Danny was the best divorce attorney in 3 counties. Tommy? His voice was surprised when he answered. What's wrong? I need a lawyer, Danny, the best one you know. What kind of trouble are you in? The kind that involves my wife screwing her boss and trying to take everything I own. There was a long pause. Meet me at my office in an hour, and Tommy, don't sign anything, don't agree to anything, and don't do anything stupid. Too late for that last part. Danny's law office occupied the top floor of the only decent building left downtown. His secretary, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret, showed me into his private office. Danny looked older than his 45 years. His hair was graying at the temples, and he wore expensive suits that couldn't quite hide the fact that he'd inherited our father's broad shoulders and working man's hands. Tell me everything, he said. I told him about the text messages, the motel, the confrontation with Sarah. Danny took notes on a yellow legal pad, occasionally asking questions or making disapproving sounds. Richard Blackwood, he said when I finished. I know him. Arrogant prick who thinks his law degree makes him untouchable. Danny leaned back in his leather chair. He's also under investigation by the state bar for inappropriate workplace behavior. 2 paralegals have filed complaints in the past year. Can we use that? Maybe. Depends on how smart they've been about covering their tracks. Danny closed his notepad. Sarah filed for divorce yesterday morning. She's asking for the house, half your business, and alimony. My business? Tommy's auto repair is technically a marital asset. She's entitled to half its value. Danny's expression was grim. She's also claiming mental cruelty and irreconcilable differences. Mental cruelty? I never laid a hand on her. She's claiming you're emotionally harmful and controlling, and that you've threatened her. I felt my temper rising. That's complete BS. I know, but she's got Blackwood representing her, and he's good at making juries believe whatever story serves his client. Danny stood up and walked to the window, overlooking Main Street. There's something else. Sarah's claiming you have a gambling problem and that you've been hiding money. What money? We're barely breaking even as it is. That's what we'll have to prove. Danny turned back to me. This is going to get ugly, Tommy. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Sarah's smug expression when she told me I couldn't afford a lawyer. I thought about Richard Blackwood's BMW in that motel parking lot. I thought about 12 years of marriage flushed down the drain for a middle-aged lawyer with a receding hairline and a wandering eye. Yeah, I said. I'm prepared. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 9 a.m. I arrived at the courthouse 15 minutes early, wearing the only suit I owned, a navy blue number I'd bought for my father's funeral. Danny met me on the steps, looking confident in his expensive charcoal gray suit and Italian leather shoes. Remember what we discussed, he said as we walked through the metal detectors. Don't react to anything Sarah or Blackwood say. Let me handle the talking. What if they lie? They will lie. That's what makes this fun. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with wood-paneled walls and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly jaundiced. Sarah was already seated at the plaintiff's table with Richard Blackwood. She wore a conservative black dress and had her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked like a grieving widow rather than an unfaithful wife. Blackwood was exactly what I'd expected. Mid-50s, balding, with the soft look of a man who'd never done physical labor. He wore a $1,000 suit and carried himself with the arrogance of someone who'd never been told no. When he saw me, his lips curled into a smirk. Judge Patricia Hendricks called the court to order. She was a stern-looking woman in her 60s with gray hair and no-nonsense glasses. I'd heard she was fair but tough, with little patience for lawyers who tried to waste her time. This is a preliminary hearing in the matter of Brennan versus Brennan, she announced. Mr. Blackwood, you may proceed. Blackwood stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. Your Honor, my client Sarah Brennan is seeking dissolution of her marriage to Thomas Brennan due to irreconcilable differences and a pattern of emotional misuse. Mrs. Brennan has been forced to endure years of controlling behavior, financial manipulation, and verbal threats. I started to stand up, but Danny put a hand on my arm. Mrs. Brennan is a dedicated paralegal who has worked tirelessly to build a career despite her husband's attempts to undermine her professional growth. She's seeking equitable distribution of marital assets, including the family home and Mr. Brennan's automotive repair business, as well as reasonable alimony to help her transition to independent living. Blackwood gestured towards Sarah, who dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Your Honor, Mrs. Brennan fears for her safety. Just last week, her husband engaged in stalking behavior, following her to her workplace and vandalizing private property. Objection, Danny said calmly. Mr. Blackwood is making accusations without evidence. Sustained, Judge Hendricks said. Mr. Blackwood, please stick to the facts. Of course, Your Honor. Mrs. Brennan is simply asking for what's rightfully hers, after 12 years of marriage, to a man who has shown himself to be unstable and vindictive. Blackwood sat down, looking pleased with himself. Sarah was still playing the victim, clutching her tissue and avoiding eye contact with me. Mr. Brennan, Judge Hendricks said, looking at Danny. Your response? Danny stood up slowly, straightening his tie. Your Honor, my client Thomas Brennan is a hard-working small business owner who has provided for his wife throughout their marriage. He's never been arrested, never been charged with any crime, and has no history of domestic violence. Danny walked around the table, his voice gaining strength. What we have here is a case of adultery disguised as irreconcilable differences. Mrs. Brennan has been conducting an extramarital affair with her supervisor, Mr. Richard Blackwood, who coincidentally is representing her in these proceedings. Sarah's face went white. Blackwood jumped to his feet. Your Honor, this is outrageous. I demand— You'll sit down and be quiet, Judge Hendricks snapped. Continue, Mr. Brennan. Thank you, Your Honor. My client has photographic evidence of his wife's vehicle at a local motel, along with Mr. Blackwood's distinctive BMW. He also has text messages that were mistakenly sent to his phone, messages that leave little doubt about the nature of their relationship. Danny pulled out a folder and handed copies to the court clerk. Furthermore, we believe Mr. Blackwood has violated professional ethics by engaging in an improper, intimate relationship with a subordinate and then representing that subordinate in legal proceedings against her husband. The courtroom was dead silent. Sarah was crying now. Real tears, not the fake ones she'd been producing earlier. Blackwood looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Mr. Blackwood, Judge Hendricks said, her voice icy, do you care to respond to these allegations? Blackwood cleared his throat. Your Honor, my personal life has no bearing on my client's legitimate claims, even if there were some impropriety. That doesn't change the fact that Mrs. Brennan deserves her fair share of marital assets. Actually, it does, Danny said. Under state law, adultery affects both property distribution and alimony awards. My client shouldn't have to subsidize his wife's affair with her lawyer. Judge Hendricks looked through the photographs and documents Danny had submitted. After several long minutes, she looked up. Mr. Blackwood, I'm troubled by these allegations. I'm ordering an immediate ethics investigation by the state bar. In the meantime, you're removed from this case. Mrs. Brennan will need to find new representation." Sarah gasped. Blackwood's face turned red. "Your Honor, you can't—" "I can and I will. This hearing is adjourned pending Mrs. Brennan's retention of new counsel." The judge banged her gavel. "And Mr. Blackwood, I suggest you consult with your malpractice insurance carrier." As we left the courtroom, I could hear Sarah sobbing and Blackwood trying to calm her down. Danny was grinning like he'd just won the lottery. "That," he said, "was even better than I hoped. What happens now? Now they scramble to find a new lawyer willing to take a case this messy. Most of the good ones won't touch it, not with Blackwood's ethics violation hanging over everything." Danny clapped me on the shoulder. "You did good, little brother. Dad would be proud." It was the first kind thing Danny had said to me since the funeral. That evening, I was working late at the garage when I heard a car pull up outside. Through the grimy window, I saw Sarah's Honda in the parking lot. She sat behind the wheel for several minutes before finally getting out and walking to the office door. I let her knock twice before answering. "We need to talk," she said. "Talk to my lawyer. Tom, please. This doesn't have to be ugly." I laughed. "It's already ugly, Sarah. You made sure of that when you decided to screw your boss." She flinched. "It's not what you think." "Really? What is it then?" Sarah looked around the garage, at the tools hanging on pegboard walls, at the oil-stained concrete floor, at the ancient Coca-Cola calendar that hadn't been changed since 1907. "It's this," she said, gesturing at the mess around us. "It's living in a town where the biggest excitement is the Friday night high school football game. It's watching you come home every night covered in grease, talking about carburetors and brake pads like they're the most important things in the world. They pay the bills. Barely. Do you know what Richard makes in a year? More than you'll make in your entire lifetime." Her voice was getting louder, more desperate. "He has a house on the lake, a condo in Florida, season tickets to the symphony. He travels, Tom. He's been to Paris, to Rome, to places I'll never see if I stay married to you. So this is about money. It's about having a life worth living." Sarah was crying again, but these were angry tears. "I'm 38 years old, and what do I have to show for it? A house with a leaky roof, a husband who thinks dinner at Applebee's is fine dining, and a savings account with less than $10,000 in it. I never stopped you from doing anything. You never encouraged me to do anything either. When I got promoted to senior paralegal, you said congratulations and went back to watching TV. When I said I wanted to take night classes to become a lawyer myself, you said we couldn't afford it. Because we couldn't afford it. Richard would have found a way to afford it. Richard believes in me." I stared at her for a long moment. This woman standing in my garage, this bitter, grasping stranger, when had she replaced the girl I'd married? When had love turned into resentment, dreams into accusations? "Get out," I said quietly. "Tom, get out of my garage, get out of my life, and tell your boyfriend that slashing his tire was just the beginning." Sarah's eyes widened. "You did that?" "I did a lot of things, and I'm going to do a lot more before this is over." She backed toward the door. "You're scaring me." "Good, you should be scared. Because the man you married, the one who put up with your complaints and your coldness and your constant disappointment, he's gone. What you're looking at now is someone who has absolutely nothing left to lose." Sarah ran to her car and drove away, tires squealing on the asphalt. I watched her taillights disappear into the darkness, then went back to work on the transmission I'd been rebuilding. My hands were steady, my mind was clear, and for the first time in months, I felt like myself again. The old Tom would have begged her to stay, would have promised to change, would have accepted blame for problems that weren't his fault. The new Tom had other plans. Word travels fast in a small town, especially word about scandal. By Thursday morning, half the town knew about Sarah's affair and the courtroom drama. The other half found out by lunchtime. I was under the hood of a 1998 Buick when my old friend Mike Castellano showed up at the garage. Mike and I had been buddies since high school. We'd played football together, double-dated, been each other's best man. His wife Jennifer was Sarah's closest friend, and the four of us had spent countless evenings together over the years, playing cards, watching movies, pretending we were happy. "Hey, Tom," Mike said, his voice carefully neutral. "Got a minute?" I straightened up, wiping my hands on a rag. "Sure, what's up?" Mike looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Jen and I heard about what happened in court. We wanted to check on you, make sure you're okay." I'm fine, better than fine, actually. Look, man, I know this is hard. Divorce is tough on everyone. Mike glanced around the garage, anywhere but at my face. But maybe you should think about how you're handling this. People are talking. Let them talk. Sarah's been staying with us since Tuesday. She's pretty shaken up. Mike finally met my eyes. She said you threatened her. I felt my temper rising, but I kept my voice level. Did she mention why she needs a place to stay? Did she tell you about her extracurricular activities with her boss? That's between you and her. But threatening her isn't going to solve anything. I didn't threaten her. I told her the truth, that I'm not the same pushover she married. Mike sighed. Tom, we've been friends for 20 years. I'm trying to help you here. If you keep acting like this, you're going to lose more than just your wife. What's that supposed to mean? It means people are choosing sides, and right now most of them are choosing Sarah's side. I stared at him. Even you? Mike looked away. Jen thinks Sarah deserves better than what she got from you. And honestly, after seeing how you've been acting, I'm starting to agree with her. Something cold settled in my chest. Get out. Tom, get out of my garage. And tell your wife that if Sarah needs a place to stay, she can move in with her boyfriend. I hear he's got a nice house on the lake. Mike shook his head sadly. You're making a mistake, man. A big one. After he left, I sat in my office chair and stared at the phone. 20 years of friendship gone. Just like that. But Mike was just the beginning. Over the next few days, the cold shoulder spread through town like a virus. Guys I'd known since childhood suddenly had urgent business elsewhere when they saw me coming. Women who'd smiled and waved for years now crossed the street to avoid me. At Murphy's bar, where I'd been drinking Friday night beers for a decade, conversations stopped when I walked in. The message was clear. Sarah was the victim, and I was the villain. Fine, if they wanted a villain, I'd give them one. I started with Richard Blackwood's BMW. It was easy enough to find. He lived in Lakewood Estates, the only upscale neighborhood in a 50-mile radius. His house was a sprawling contemporary monstrosity with more glass than walls. The kind of place that screamed, "Look how successful I am," to anyone driving by. The BMW sat in his circular driveway like a shrine to German engineering. I parked my truck 3 blocks away and walked back through the woods that bordered his property. It was past midnight, and the house was dark. I'd brought a bottle of paint thinner and a funnel. It took less than 5 minutes to pour the chemical over the BMW's pristine paint job, watching it bubble and blister in the moonlight. Then I left a note under the windshield wiper. There's always a price for screwing someone else's wife. This is just the down payment. The next morning, I was having coffee at Rosie's Diner when I heard sirens heading toward Lakewood Estates. I smiled and ordered another cup. But destroying Blackwood's car was just the appetizer. The main course required more planning. I spent the weekend researching Sarah's new life, using the internet skills my nephew had taught me. Social media was a goldmine. Sarah had been posting photos of herself in Blackwood at expensive restaurants, art galleries, wine tastings. She looked happier than I'd seen her in years, glowing with the satisfaction of trading up. The photos told a story, but they also revealed something else. Sarah had been lying about when the affair started. Some of the pictures were dated 6 months ago, others even earlier. This wasn't a recent fling, it was a calculated exit strategy. That discovery ended whatever sympathy I might have had left for her. I printed out the most highly revealing photos and made copies. Then I drove to the law firm where Sarah worked and asked to speak with the office manager, a stern woman named Patricia Holloway who'd been there for 30 years. I have some information about employee misconduct, I told her, handing over the folder. I thought the partners should know what's been going on. Mrs. Holloway looked through the photos, her expression growing more disapproving with each page. This is very serious, Mr. Brennan. Inappropriate workplace conduct is something we take extremely seriously. I'm not looking for money or revenge, I lied smoothly. I just think the other employees deserve a safe work environment. Of course. We'll launch an immediate investigation. By Wednesday, Richard Blackwood was on administrative leave, pending a full ethics review. By Friday, Sarah had been fired for unprofessional conduct and violation of workplace policies. The irony was delicious. She'd thrown away our marriage for a man who couldn't even protect her job. But I wasn't done yet. Sarah had always been proud of her college degree, the one that had qualified her for the paralegal position. She'd framed her diploma and hung it in our living room, right next to our wedding photo. What she didn't know was that I'd always suspected something was off about her college transcripts. It took 3 phone calls to confirm my suspicions. Sarah had attended State University for 2 years, then dropped out when her grades fell below the minimum GPA requirement. The degree she'd been using to get jobs for the past 15 years didn't exist. I made copies of her real transcripts and sent them anonymously to every law firm in the county, along with a note explaining that Sarah Brennan had been misrepresenting her qualifications for over a decade. Within a week, word had spread through the legal community. Sarah's reputation was destroyed. No law firm would hire her, not even for filing or answering phones. That's when she made her biggest mistake. She came to see me at the garage, begging for mercy. "You've ruined my life," she sobbed, standing in the same spot where she'd told me I was a loser just weeks earlier. "I can't get a job anywhere. Richard won't even return my calls. I'm living in a motel room, Tom. A motel room." I looked up from the engine I was working on. "The Seacoast Motel?" Her face crumpled. "That's not funny. I think it's hilarious. Poetic justice, you might call it. I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry for everything, for the affair, for the things I said, for trying to take the house. Can't we work this out?" "Work what out? You made your choice, Sarah. You chose Richard and his money and his fancy lifestyle. How's that working out for you? Please, I'll do anything. I'll sign whatever papers you want. You can keep the house, the business, everything. Just make it stop." I set down my wrench and really looked at her. Sarah had always been pretty in a conventional way. Blonde hair, blue eyes, the kind of looks that attracted second glances from men in grocery stores. But now, she looked haggard, desperate. Her hair needed washing, her clothes were wrinkled, and there were dark circles under her eyes. "Anything?" I asked. Hope flickered in her expression. "Yes, anything." I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Then you can start by getting the heck out of my garage." The hope died. "Tom, you had your chance to work things out, Sarah. You had 12 years of chances. But you were too busy planning your escape, too busy dreaming about a better life with a better man." I picked up my wrench again. "Well, congratulations. You got exactly what you wanted." "This isn't what I wanted." "No? You wanted excitement, adventure, a man who could give you things I never could. You got all of that. The fact that it didn't work out the way you planned isn't my problem." Sarah stood there for another minute, tears streaming down her face. Then she turned and walked away, her shoulders shaking with sobs. I went back to work on the engine, humming an old country song about cheating hearts and broken dreams. The town had turned against me completely by October. What started with Mike and Jennifer had spread through our social circle like cancer, poisoning every relationship I'd built over the years. The guys I'd played poker with every Thursday night stopped calling. The neighbors who'd borrowed tools and shared beers over the fence now avoided eye contact when I mowed my lawn. Even my customers were starting to drift away. The Hendersons took their Toyota to the dealership instead of bringing it to me. The Kowalskis found a new mechanic across town. My appointment book, once packed solid weeks in advance, was starting to show empty slots. But the worst betrayal came from an unexpected source. I was closing up the garage on a Friday evening when a familiar pickup truck pulled into the parking lot. My nephew Jake climbed out, looking nervous. Jake was my sister's boy, 22 years old and fresh out of community college with a degree in automotive technology. I'd been training him for the past year, teaching him everything I knew about engines and transmissions and the delicate art of keeping old cars running. "Uncle Tom," he said, not meeting my eyes, "we need to talk." I knew what was coming before he said another word. "Let me guess. You're quitting." Jake nodded miserably. "Mom says I have to. She says being associated with you is going to hurt my career prospects." My sister Linda had always been the practical one in the family, the one who weighed every decision against its potential consequences. She'd married a bank manager, lived in a tidy subdivision, and raised her kids to be respectable members of society. "And what do you think?" I asked Jake. "I think this whole situation sucks." Jake kicked at a loose piece of gravel. "But I also think maybe you've gone too far. Sarah's living in a motel, Uncle Tom. She can't find work anywhere. People are saying you're trying to destroy her completely. People are saying a lot of things. Are they wrong?" I studied my nephew's face. Jake had always been a good kid, honest, hardworking, eager to learn. He reminded me of myself at that age, back when I still believed that doing the right thing mattered. "Yeah," I said finally. "They're wrong. I'm not trying to destroy Sarah. I already did destroy her." Jake flinched. "Jesus, Uncle Tom, listen to yourself. You want to know what I've learned, Jake? Nice guys finish last. Honest guys get screwed. And loyal guys get their hearts ripped out by people they trusted. I walked over to my toolbox and pulled out the keys to the garage. Sarah didn't just cheat on me. She planned it, executed it, and then tried to take everything I'd worked for. She showed me exactly how much our marriage meant to her. Nothing. So you decided to show her the same thing. I decided to show her what happens when you declare war on someone who has nothing left to lose. Jake shook his head. This isn't you, Uncle Tom. The man who taught me how to rebuild an engine, who helped me with my homework, who came to every one of my baseball games. That guy wouldn't do something like this. That guy was a sucker. That guy spent 12 years trying to make a selfish woman happy, and all he got for his trouble was a knife in the back. So you became someone worse than her? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at Jake, seeing disappointment in his young face, and for a moment I almost wavered. Almost. Then I remembered Sarah's words. You're a small-town mechanic who never finished college. Richard can give me things you never could. Maybe I did, I told Jake. Maybe that's exactly what I became. Jake left his keys on my desk and walked away without another word. That night I sat in my empty house drinking whiskey and planning my next move. The house felt bigger without Sarah's things in it. Echoes bouncing off bare walls where her pictures used to hang. I'd packed up everything that reminded me of her and stored it all in the basement. 12 years of marriage reduced to cardboard boxes gathering dust. The divorce papers had been finalized the week before. Sarah's new lawyer, a young public defender named Martinez, who was clearly in over his head, had advised her to take whatever settlement I offered. She got her car, her clothes, and $5,000. I kept the house, the business, and my dignity. But dignity was cold comfort on a Friday night with nowhere to go and no one to call. I was on my third whiskey when someone knocked on my front door. Through the peephole, I saw Jennifer Castellano standing on my porch, looking determined and angry. I opened the door. Mike's not with you? Mike doesn't know I'm here. Jennifer pushed past me into the living room. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but she had the personality of someone much larger. We need to talk. About what? About the fact that you've lost your completely mind. Jennifer spun around to face me, her eyes blazing. Do you know what you've done to Sarah? Do you have any idea? I know exactly what I've done. She's broken, Tom. Completely broken. She sits in that motel room all day, crying and staring at the walls. She's lost 20 pounds. She can't sleep, can't eat, can't function. Good. Jennifer slapped me, hard. The sound echoed through the empty room like a sharp crack. What happened to you? She demanded. The Tom Brennan I knew would never torture someone like this, no matter what they'd done to him. I rubbed my cheek where she'd hit me. The Tom Brennan you knew was a fool. No, he was a good man, a kind man. Sarah made a mistake. A mistake. I laughed bitterly. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk at the store. A mistake is bouncing a check. What Sarah did was calculated betrayal. She was unhappy. So was I. But I didn't go looking for someone else to fix my problems. Jennifer's anger seemed to deflate slightly. Tom, please, I'm begging you. Call off whatever vendetta this is. Let her rebuild her life. Why should I? Because you loved her once. Because 12 years has to count for something. Because this isn't who you want to be. I walked to the window and looked out at the street where I'd lived for over a decade. The Kowalski's house was dark. The Hendersons had a for sale sign in their front yard. They were moving to Florida, getting away from the drama that had consumed their quiet neighborhood. You're wrong about one thing, Jen, I said without turning around, and this is exactly who I want to be. For the first time in my adult life, I'm not trying to please anyone, not trying to be the good guy, not trying to do the right thing. It's liberating. It's sick, maybe, but it's honest. I faced her again. Sarah wanted to know what Richard could give her that I couldn't. Well, now she knows. He could give her temporary excitement, expensive dinners, and a few months of feeling special. But when things got complicated, when her association with him became a liability, he disappeared. So you win. Is that what you wanted to hear? I considered the question seriously. No, Jen, I don't win. Nobody wins in a situation like this, but I don't lose alone anymore. Jennifer stared at me for a long moment, then shook her head sadly. I don't know you anymore. Good. The guy you knew was weak. After she left, I poured another whiskey and sat in my recliner, thinking about Jake's question. So you became someone worse than her? Maybe I had. Maybe the old Tom would have been horrified by the things I'd done. The systematic destruction of Sarah's life and reputation. The old Tom would have taken the high road, filed for divorce quietly, and tried to move on with dignity and tact. But the old Tom would have spent the rest of his life wondering what he could have done differently, blaming himself for Sarah's betrayal, accepting responsibility for her unhappiness. The new Tom slept just fine at night. My phone rang at 2 a.m. I almost didn't answer it, but the caller ID showed Danny's number. Tommy, you need to get down to the hospital. I sat up, suddenly alert. What happened? It's Sarah. She's in the emergency room. Apparent attempt to harm herself. The words hit me like ice water. Is she? She's alive, unconscious, but alive. They pumped her stomach. She took a bottle of sleeping pills. I was already reaching for my clothes. I'll be right there. Tommy, wait. You should know, Mike and Jennifer are here. So are Sarah's parents. They're not exactly happy to see your name on her emergency contact list. I hesitated, shirt half on. Maybe I shouldn't come. Maybe you shouldn't, but maybe you should. Danny's voice was quiet. She asked for you, Tommy. Right before she passed out, she asked the paramedics to call you. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in the hospital waiting room, surrounded by people who hated me. Sarah's mother, a thin woman with prematurely gray hair, glared at me from across the room. Her father, a retired factory worker with hands like ham hocks, looked like he wanted to strangle me with his bare hands. Mike and Jennifer sat together, whispering and casting occasional hostile glances in my direction. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could guess. Dr. Patel, a young resident with tired eyes, emerged from the treatment area around 4 a.m. She's stable, he announced to the room. We were able to clear most of the medication from her system. She's going to be okay, physically. Can we see her? Sarah's mother asked. One at a time, and only for a few minutes. She's still very weak. Sarah's parents went first, then Mike and Jennifer. I sat alone in the waiting room, surrounded by the ghosts of my choices. Finally, Dr. Patel approached me. Mr. Brennan, your wife is asking for you? Ex-wife, I corrected automatically. Ex-wife. She's in room 314. Sarah looked tiny in the hospital bed, dwarfed by machines and IV lines. Her face was pale, her hair limp against the pillow. She opened her eyes when I walked in. Tom. Her voice was barely a whisper. I sat in the chair next to her bed. How are you feeling? Stupid. She tried to smile, but it came out as more of a grimace. Really, really stupid. Sarah, let me talk, please. I don't know if I'll have the courage to say this again. She took a shaky breath. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for cheating on you, for lying to you, for trying to take everything you'd worked for. I'm sorry for throwing away 12 years like it meant nothing. I didn't say anything. I thought I wanted something better, something more exciting. I thought you were holding me back, keeping me from the life I deserved. Tears were running down her cheeks. But you weren't the problem, Tom. I was. I was selfish and ungrateful and stupid. Sarah, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to take me back or fix this or make everything okay. I just wanted you to know that I know what I lost. I know what I threw away. She closed her eyes. I also know what you did to me. The job, the degree, Richard's car. I know it was you. My chest tightened. And I deserved it, all of it. You gave me 12 years of your life, and I repaid you by screwing my boss and trying to steal your house. She opened her eyes and looked at me directly. But Tom, you need to stop now. This thing you've become, this angry, vengeful person, it's going to destroy you too. Maybe I'm already destroyed. No, you're hurt and angry, and you have every right to be. But you're not destroyed. Not yet. She reached out and touched my hand. Don't let me take that away from you too. Don't let what I did turn you into someone you'll hate. I sat there for a long time, holding her hand and thinking about Jake's disappointed face, Jennifer's slap, the empty appointment book at the garage. I don't know how to stop, I admitted. Yes, you do. You're the strongest person I know, Tom. You're the man who built a business from nothing, who took care of his sick father for 2 years, who never gave up on anything in his life. You know how to stop. A nurse appeared in the doorway. I'm sorry, but visiting hours are over. I stood up, but Sarah didn't let go of my hand. Tom, will you do something for me? What? Will you try to remember the man you were before I ruined everything? Will you try to find him again? I squeezed her hand gently, then let go. I'll try. But as I walked out of the hospital into the gray dawn light, I wasn't sure the man she remembered still existed. Too much had happened. Too many bridges had been burned. Too much damage had been done. The old Tom might have been worth saving. The new Tom wasn't so sure he wanted to be saved. 3 months after Sarah's attempt to harm herself, I was a different kind of broken than before. The rage that had sustained me through the divorce and its aftermath had burned itself out, leaving behind something colder and more calculating. I'd stopped destroying Sarah's life. There wasn't much left to destroy anyway. But I hadn't found my way back to being the man I used to be. The garage was failing. My customer base had shrunk to a handful of loyal clients who either didn't know about the scandal or didn't care. I was barely making enough to cover expenses, and the bank had started sending polite but firm letters about my business loan payments. Sarah had moved back in with her parents, taking a job at a grocery store for minimum wage. We'd seen each other exactly once since the hospital. A brief encounter at the post office where we'd exchanged awkward hellos and carefully avoided eye contact. I was considering selling the business and leaving town when everything changed again. It started with a phone call from Danny on a cold February morning. "Tommy, we need to talk. Can you come to my office?" "What's wrong now?" "Just come. And Tommy, bring any financial records you have for the garage. Bank statements, tax returns, everything." An hour later, I was sitting across from Danny's desk while he spread documents across its surface like a poker player revealing a winning hand. "I've been doing some digging into Richard Blackwood's finances," he said. "Call it professional curiosity. Why? Because something about this whole situation bothered me. The timeline, the way everything played out, the fact that he disappeared so completely when things got complicated." Danny pulled out a thick folder. "Turns out our boy Richard has been a very busy man." He handed me a series of bank statements and legal documents. "Blackwood's been running a scam for years. He identifies married women in vulnerable situations, usually clients or employees, seduces them, convinces them to file for divorce, then manipulates the proceedings to maximize his fees while minimizing their settlements." I stared at the papers. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Sarah wasn't his first victim, or his second, or his 10th. Danny's expression was grim. "I found records of at least 15 similar cases over the past 5 years. Same pattern every time: affair, divorce, the woman gets screwed financially, Blackwood disappears with a hefty legal fee. That's impossible. Sarah came to him for representation after we were already having problems." "Did she, or did he approach her first?" Danny pulled out another document. "Look at this. Blackwood's been having lunch at Romano's every Friday for 2 years. Same table, same time. Romano's is right across the street from Sarah's office." I felt sick. "You think he targeted her?" "I think he saw an unhappy wife with assets worth stealing and decided to make his move. The affair was just part of the con." Danny showed me more evidence: credit card receipts, hotel registrations, even photographs from a private investigator he'd hired. The pattern was undeniable. Blackwood was a predator who specialized in destroying marriages for profit. "There's more," Danny said. "Remember how Sarah's degree turned out to be fake?" I exposed that. "No, you didn't. You couldn't have. The records you would have needed are sealed by the university. Only someone with legal authority could have accessed them." The room seemed to spin around me. Blackwood. Blackwood. He fed you the information, probably through an anonymous tip or a mysterious phone call. He wanted Sarah discredited and unemployable, so she'd be completely dependent on him. I thought back to those weeks after the divorce filing, trying to remember how I'd learned about Sarah's fake degree. Danny was right. The information had come from an anonymous source, someone who claimed to be a former classmate who'd always suspected Sarah was lying. But why would he want to destroy her? If he was planning to be with her, he was never planning to be with her long term. Look at his pattern: seduce, divorce, collect fees, disappear. Sarah was just another mark. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. So everything I did to her, everything you did to her, he was planning to do anyway. You just made his job easier. Danny leaned back in his chair. "There's one more thing, Tommy. Blackwood's been disbarred. The state bar investigation found evidence of professional misconduct, fraud, and client exploitation. He's facing criminal charges. What about his other victims? Most of them are filing civil suits. There's talk of a class action lawsuit." Danny smiled grimly. "Blackwood's going to lose everything: his law license, his house, his assets, probably his freedom." I sat in stunned silence, processing the implications. Sarah hadn't been the calculating adulteress I'd imagined. She'd been a victim, manipulated by a professional con man who'd exploited her unhappiness and insecurities. And I'd helped him do it. Jesus Christ, Danny. What have I done? You've been played. We both have. Danny gathered up the documents. The question is, what are you going to do about it now? That evening, I drove to Sarah's parents' house. It was a small ranch-style home in an older neighborhood, with a neat yard and plastic flowers in window boxes. Sarah's car was in the driveway. Her mother answered the door, her expression immediately turning hostile when she saw me. What do you want, Tom? I need to talk to Sarah. It's important. I think you've done enough talking. Mrs. Patterson, please. I have information about Richard Blackwood that she needs to hear. Sarah appeared behind her mother, looking thin and tired. It's okay, Mom. Let him in. We sat in the living room while I explained what Danny had discovered. Sarah listened in silence, her face growing paler with each revelation. When I finished, she sat quietly for a long time. So none of it was real, she said finally. The romance, the promises, the talk about a future together, it was all just part of his con. I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm sorry for what he did to you, and I'm sorry for what I did to you. What you did to me? She looked confused. Tom, you exposed him. If you hadn't taken those pictures at the motel, if you hadn't fought back, I might have lost everything to him. You did lose everything. Your job, your reputation, your future. I destroyed all of that. Sarah shook her head. No, you didn't. He did. He was planning to destroy me from the beginning. You just accelerated the timeline. That doesn't make it right. No, it doesn't. But it doesn't make you the villain either. Sarah reached across the space between us and took my hand. We were both victims, Tom. We both got played by someone who was smarter and more ruthless than either of us. I looked at this woman I'd been married to for 12 years. This woman I'd loved and hated and tried to destroy. Can you forgive me? Can you forgive me? We sat there holding hands in her parents' living room, two broken people trying to figure out how to put the pieces back together. I don't know if we can fix this, Sarah said. Too much has happened. Too much damage has been done. I know. But maybe we can try to understand each other. Maybe we can try to remember why we fell in love in the first place. Over the following weeks, Sarah and I began talking regularly. Not about reconciliation, that bridge had been burned too thoroughly, but about healing, about forgiveness, about finding a way forward that didn't involve destroying each other. I learned that Sarah's unhappiness in our marriage had been real, even if Blackwood had exploited it for his own purposes. She'd felt trapped in a small town, limited by circumstances and her own fears. The affair hadn't been about not loving me. It had been about not loving herself. Sarah learned that my reaction to her betrayal hadn't been purely vindictive. It had been the desperate response of a man who'd felt his entire world collapse, who'd lashed out because he didn't know any other way to deal with the pain. We were both guilty. We were both victims. We were both human. The garage started to recover as word spread about Blackwood's crimes. People who'd shunned me began to understand that the situation was more complicated than they'd realized. Customers returned, apologetic and embarrassed about their rush to judgment. Jake came back to work, sheepish but determined to rebuild our relationship. Mike and Jennifer invited me to dinner, their first gesture toward reconciliation. Even my sister Linda called to apologize for forcing Jake to quit. Sarah found a job at a nonprofit organization that helped domestic misuse victims, work that gave her a sense of purpose she'd never found in the legal field. She was seeing a therapist, working through the trauma of Blackwood's manipulation and the aftermath of our marriage's destruction. We weren't friends exactly, but we weren't enemies anymore either. We were two people who'd survived a catastrophe and were trying to learn from it. 6 months after Danny's revelation, I was closing the garage when Sarah's car pulled into the parking lot. She got out carrying a manila envelope. I have something for you, she said, handing me the envelope. Inside was a check for $50,000. What's this? My share of the settlement from the class action lawsuit against Blackwood. I want you to have it. I stared at the check. Sarah, I can't take this. Yes, you can. You lost customers because of what happened. Your business suffered because I brought chaos into your life. This is my way of trying to make that right. But you need this money. You're starting over, building a new life. I'm building a life based on who I really am, not on money stolen from other people's pain. I don't want anything that came from Richard Blackwood, even indirectly. I looked at the check again, then back at Sarah. Are you sure? I'm sure. Use it to expand the garage, hire more people, maybe even take that vacation you always talked about but never took. I folded the check and put it in my pocket. Thank you. Thank you for fighting back, Tom. Thank you for being strong enough to expose him. Even if your motives weren't entirely pure, you saved me from something much worse than what actually happened. As Sarah drove away, I stood in the parking lot of my garage and thought about the man I'd been, the man I'd become, and the man I might still be able to become. I wasn't the same person I'd been before Sarah's affair. That man had been naive, trusting to a fault, willing to accept unhappiness as the price of peace. I wasn't that man anymore, and I never would be again. But I wasn't the vengeful, destructive person I'd become during the divorce either. That man had been consumed by anger and pain, lashing out at everyone around him, mistaking cruelty for strength. I was something new now, someone who'd been broken and rebuilt. Someone who understood that the world was more complicated than he'd once believed. Someone who'd learned that sometimes the only way to survive was to fight back. The old Tom would have been destroyed by Sarah's betrayal. The angry Tom had nearly destroyed himself in response to it. But this Tom, this scarred, wiser, more careful Tom, this Tom might actually be okay. I deposited the check the next morning and used part of it to hire Jake full-time, with a raise and benefits. I used another part to upgrade the garage's equipment and expand the waiting area. The rest went into a savings account, not for emergencies this time, but for opportunities. For the first time in over a year, I was thinking about the future instead of dwelling on the past. Sarah and I saw each other occasionally around town. We were polite, even friendly. We asked about each other's work, commented on the weather, exchanged the kind of small talk that former spouses make when they've moved past hatred but haven't quite reached indifference. It wasn't the ending either of us had imagined when we'd stood at the altar 12 years earlier, promising to love each other until death do us part. But it was an ending we could both live with. Richard Blackwood was sentenced to 5 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution to his victims. His house was sold to cover legal fees and settlements. His law license was permanently revoked. I felt no satisfaction in his downfall. He'd been brought down by his own crimes, not by my revenge. If anything, I felt sorry for him. He'd had everything: education, success, respect, and he'd thrown it all away for money and the thrill of manipulation. In the end, he'd destroyed himself more thoroughly than I could have ever destroyed him. The last time I saw Sarah was at the grocery store 6 months later. She looked healthy and happy, her hair longer than she'd worn it during our marriage, her smile genuine for the first time in years. "How are you, Tom?" she asked. "I'm good. Really good. You?" "I'm good too. I'm seeing someone, actually, a counselor from work. His name is David." I felt a brief pang, not jealousy exactly, but something like nostalgia for what we'd once had. "I'm happy for you. He's nothing like Richard. Nothing like you either, really. He's quiet, kind, patient. He's been through his own divorce, so he understands about starting over." "That sounds perfect for you. What about you? Anyone special?" I shook my head. "Not yet. I'm still figuring out who I am now. Seems unfair to drag someone else into that process." Sarah smiled. "You'll figure it out. You always do." As we parted ways in the parking lot, I realized that for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I genuinely hoped Sarah would be happy. Not because I was trying to be the bigger person, not because I was forcing myself to forgive, but because I'd finally reached a place where her happiness didn't threaten mine. That night, I sat on my back porch with a beer and thought about the journey I'd taken from the man I'd been to the man I was now. It hadn't been a pretty journey. There had been too much anger, too much pain, too much collateral damage along the way. But it had been necessary. The old Tom would have spent the rest of his life wondering what he'd done wrong, blaming himself for Sarah's unhappiness, accepting responsibility for her choices. He would have been eaten alive by guilt and regret. This Tom knew better. This Tom understood that you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved, that you can't love someone into loving you back, and that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from people who don't value what you have to offer. This Tom also understood that revenge was a luxury he couldn't afford. It felt good in the moment, but it extracted a price that was higher than the satisfaction it provided. It turned you into someone you didn't recognize, someone your friends and family couldn't love. I'd learned to fight back without becoming a monster. I'd learned to protect myself without destroying others. I'd learned that strength wasn't about how much damage you could inflict. It was about how much damage you could survive and still remain human. The garage was thriving again. Jake had turned out to be a gifted mechanic with a natural talent for diagnosing complex problems. We'd hired 2 part-time employees and were considering expanding into auto body work. My appointment book was full for the next 3 weeks. The bank had sent a congratulatory letter about my loan payments being ahead of schedule. For the first time in my adult life, I had money in savings and a business that was growing instead of just surviving. More importantly, I had my self-respect back. Not the naive confidence of the man I'd been before Sarah's affair, but something harder won and more durable. I knew what I was capable of now, both the good and the bad. I knew my limits and my strengths. I knew what I would and wouldn't tolerate from other people. I was 43 years old, divorced, scarred by experiences I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. But I was also free in a way I'd never been before. Free from the need to please everyone, free from the fear of being alone, free from the illusion that being a good person guaranteed a good life. The old Tom had believed in fairy tales. This Tom believed in himself. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, that felt like enough.